C.J. Gardner-Johnson, he signs with Philadelphia Eagles for 3 years, $33 million.
You wipe that grin off your face, Lamb.
I'm not smiling. That's just my face.
I know. I'm messing with you.
Goodness gracious. Broder, you got to break this down for us, man.
Yeah, so if there was, and I said this yesterday on Ermanni and Edwards, if there was one place I could predict that he does not go in the entire NFL, it's Philadelphia. It's the Eagles.
Man.
He hated their fans and their media. We see an apology from CJGJ after he signs, but he left. And you know what caused it? The dollar bills. 3 years, $33 million. That's a deal you can't refuse. I can't even hate him for it.
Yeah.
The Lions had a one-year deal on the table, a little over what he was making last year. So he was getting a raise. He got an offer from the Lions, but it wasn't a multi-year contract, and that's what he's looking for. He's looking for someone to believe in him like that, and he got it. 3 years for $33 million. He's got a starting spot. The Eagles need him, and I expect him to thrive. As long as he stays healthy, he's going to be great for that team.
Yeah, and I started there because it instantly, my mind went to maybe the Lions just offered him 1 year deal, but they did make a corresponding move in the secondary. And you know my question, man, what does this mean for Brian Branch?
Yeah. So I actually don't think it affects Brian Branch much. I think this is a nod that Iffy Melifonwu was your starting safety now. Iffy and Kirby are your free safety, your strong safety. Those two safeties playing at the back of the secondary. Brian Branch, they're molding him to be that nickel safety, that nickel type cornerback who can probably fill in at any of the safety spots, fill in that cornerback a little bit. But I don't think it affects him as much as it does Iffy and Kirby. This is their secondary now to run, hopefully for the next couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. We've talked about it, and you're kind of implying it. Brian Branch played the majority of his snaps last season as a slot nickel corner, and he played very well. Yeah. He was their best cover man last year. Your best cover corner was Brian Branch in the slot. But the only thing I have to say to C.J. Gardner-Johnson right now is,
I see what you did there.
Just like when you
don't do the queen wave.
Just like when you're just like when you're prematurely waving to the 49ers fans when you're only up 14 in the first half of the NFC Championship game. Goodbye to C.J. Gardner-Johnson. And I want to say this before I get into the actual minutia of it all. Trust Brad Holmes.
Yeah.
Me and Easy were having a conversation back in the day because, as everybody knows, me and Easy were two of the biggest anti-CJ Gardner-Johnson people at the network, probably the biggest. And we had a private.
Oh, definitely.
Yes, we had.
Just to punctuate.
Yes.
Yeah.
We had
the only two.
We had a private conversation in which, and this was Easy's idea, not mine, so I don't want to steal it. He's just like, all these people, when C.J. Gardner-Johnson doesn't get re-signed, they better be like Trust Brad Holmes, because there's a lot of people here who are basically a Trust Brad Holmes people, because how can you not? The results speak for themselves. It's just, I want that same energy with everything that he does, not Trust Brad Holmes, except when C.J. Gardner-Johnson leaves. And that's
100%. I'll answer that because unlike you two, we will be able to say that because we're not standing on a hill because the dude waved his hand one time and said some shit. I do trust Brad Holmes. I wanted C.J. Gardner-Johnson back, but hey, Brad Holmes has something cooking, so I'm cool with that. I'm not just like a slappy. I was a fan of his. I wanted him back, and I thought he was coming back. I'm not standing on a hill.
Talk to him, brother.
I trust Brad Holmes for sure.
Well, and I think a lot of people, I think this is where the anti-CJGJ and the pro-CJGJ crowd can kind of come together and commiserate and break bread. $11 million, 3 years, $33 million is a hefty contract for C.J. Gardner-Johnson.
Yeah, but how can you turn that down if you're him? He's looking for long-term stability.
Bro, that is if you're C.J. Gardner-Johnson, you'd be a fool not to turn that down. He might still hate Philly. He might still hate their fans. But here's the reality, and I think we can all agree with this.
The money.
With the Detroit Lions, he was on a prove-it deal, and he did not prove it. It wasn't his fault. He got hurt, but he still got that long-term deal from the Philadelphia Eagles. I think he was very lucky that the Eagles secondary was just so bad last year. I don't think it was just because they were missing C.J. Gardner-Johnson. I think it had more to do with the fact that Darius Slay's declining and was hurt for 5 games, and James Bradbury went from an elite corner to a pumpkin. But C.J. Gardner-Johnson, they might look at him as like, they were more successful when he was there. He left. They were less successful. What changed? So I think that's what ultimately got him the long-term deal. And congratulations for him. Congrats to him. He did the right thing.
Yeah, it's a perfect cocktail mix for him, man. Like the perfect storm that popped up. And how can you turn down that bag, even at a place that you might not want to be at? It reminds me of a lot of times when we would have to, here in the state of Detroit, see our pro teams overpay a little bit more. It's a little bit of that premium, but those players would definitely come on by if the money was right. And that's what I think we see out of this CJ GJ thing. And I know you said like the 1 year deal from the Lions was probably a little bit more money in this first year, but the long-term deal gives them a little bit more security. And what it tells me, like you've already kind of alluded to, is we got to trust Brad Holmes, man. Let Brad Holmes cook. There's got to be some type of corresponding moves that he already has kind of, or that he's already seeing or projecting to be able to make sure this Detroit Lions team is taking a step forward rather than even just plateauing, which in my opinion, if you just plateau, that to me is not cooking. That's not cooking.
You asked about Brian Branch, and the more over the last couple of minutes while you've been talking, I've been thinking about it. While I don't think it affects him a ton, what Brad Holmes could be doing, and maybe this points to some of these moves, like signing Amik Robertson yesterday.
There we go.
Because Brian Branch can play all the safety spots, you can still have insurance if Kirby or if Iffy or if Brian Branch go down in that safety room. You can have Amik Robertson play the slot or play that nickel position, which I think he was around 50-50, or it wasn't as primarily slot as everyone's saying. I believe Al Karsten, who was on the heavyweights last night, put out a tweet that sort of broke down where his snaps were. But he can play inside. Cam Sutton can play inside. So if he ends up being your CB3, he can play that nickel position too, if for whatever reason Brian Branch needs to step up and play safety for Iffy or Kirby. So there's a lot of versatility or flexibility that they have.
This is my question for you too. Looking at the signings they've already made as it relates to the cornerback and the trade for cornerback as well, is this showing more faith in what they already have in Iffy, in Brian Branch and co?
I think so. Yeah, and I don't think they're done with the secondary. I don't know if there's going to be another free agent signing. They're definitely going to find someone in the draft. Just depends on how high or how low. But I think it's definitely a nod to Iffy coming on late. If they believe he can stay healthy, they're going to commit to him, especially on his contract. But he's got maybe more potential than CJ Gardner-Johnson. What he did at the end of last year was wild. Imagine putting a defensive line together, which is that part of this team that they really got to finish addressing. Imagine if they do that. This helps out Iffy, Kirby, Mr. Ballhawk Kirby, Max Crosby, and Antonio Pierce. I mean, Robertson's a ballhawk.
Yeah.
This is – I get trust Brad Holmes. I'll be a Brad Holmes bot.
Yeah.
It's perfectly okay to be a Brad bot
because
of the results. But go ahead, KG.
No, and I like the Amik Robertson signing a lot. He's a good, young, solid corner. He's the past 2 seasons he's played 17 games apiece, so that shows me that he can stay on the field, because Brad Holmes has a thing about injured players, but he'll fill in right in that nickel slot corner spot just fine in this AG defense, man. And it shows me that they're serious about fixing this defense. He's now revamped the secondary for the second straight year. They're coming in completely different, so I'm looking forward to what it's gonna be, man. But I don't think he's done. I think definitely they will target a corner in the draft. I'm thinking second round now. That first round pick is probably going to an edge rusher. But welcome to Detroit, Amik, man. And I'm looking for good things, man.